Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the fantasyfootballfix.com YouTube channel with me, Tom Campbell. You can find me on X at UtterlyTC. And guys, we are getting our way through this tedious international break. We're all but finished now. So consequently, we're back with another Elite 11 team reveal. And I'm super excited to say that I've got Andrew Neve on this week. I'm always pleased to talk to Andrew, but this week especially as he is on his wildcard. So am I. I'm sure lots of you watching are as well. And we're going to talk through all of the wildcard strategies, guys. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Andrew, mate, welcome back to the channel, my friend. And of course, we've got wildcard chat to come. Going to ask you to pause the wildcard chat for now and just briefly sum up how's the start of the season been, mate?
No problem at all. It's been a bit of a mixed bag. I think game week 1 wasn't great at all. Game week 2 went really well. Nice big green arrow. And game week 3, again, just a bit, and that was just single-handedly came down to that Liverpool game at the end of last game week. So it's been okay. I think if you'd said to me at the beginning of the season after game week 3, if you're just outside that top million, I probably would have said, okay, I mean, I'll take that. Last season, it took me about 16 or 17 game weeks to get to where I am now. So certainly not going to complain. Yeah, we'll obviously have a look at how things went in the last particular game week, but it did literally just come down to that lack of Liverpool coverage and just only having one Liverpool player on the side.
I see. Yeah, and we will look back at game week 3, Andrew, of course, like you mentioned, like we were talking off camera beforehand, it's pretty far in the rear view mirror, but we will take a look at the team that you have left behind you now in a couple of minutes. I've got to ask you though, so behind the scenes, little spoiler guys, we were actually attempting to record this video last week, but the tech gremlins, I'm afraid, put paid to that. But it's actually worked out well because you weren't on wildcard at that particular point, Andrew. You pressed the button subsequent to that. So I've got to ask you, what prompted that, mate? Was it something that was in the offing all the time and it was actually, borderline at that time? Or was this more of a strategic decision that you were always likely to make around game weeks 3 and 4?
Very borderline, to be honest with you. It was a 50-50 call, and I think it ultimately came down to the injury to Bailey for me that sort of probably tipped it the other way, and the fact that I had to make transfers going into the next game week to put a decent enough side out in game week 4, and I hadn't pulled the trigger at the end of Sunday evening. I think it might have been perhaps the Monday or the Tuesday afterwards. And it was after thinking about it a whole lot more, and we'll obviously chat about it when we do go through the wild card, but there's a definite shift in how I've had to think about how the wild card has played this season compared to last, just simply because of those rule changes. So it's just having that extra night or two to think about it and then go, well, hold on, maybe it does make sense for me to try and attack things a little bit more. That's what ultimately led me to go, okay, well, let's go for it.
I see. Makes sense, mate. And in terms of the first 3 game weeks, had you got to the position of not needing to use any free transfers prior to pressing the wild card? And are you going to have, you've retained those through the wild card? Is that the situation you're in?
I've made one transfer, and that was for Quansah. Yeah, I started the season with him in gaming 1, and I think it was such a fine sort of line between going wildcard and not going wildcard. I think if say Quansah had still been continuing in the side and had started for Liverpool for those 3 games, pretty sure I wouldn't have wildcarded. But the fact that I had to get rid of him in game week 1, sitting with Barco on my bench, I had an injury to Bailey last game week. That's what ultimately led me to go, well, let's think about this wildcard a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, I see, mate. Well, let's look backwards before we look forward and take a look how the points played out in game week 3. Okay, so I'm sure you'll be happy to say, this is no longer the team, but it's not a disaster to me, Andrew. Like, I'm sure that this is going to be a team that resembles a lot of the folks watching here as well. So, it's a while ago since you accrued those points, but I've got to ask you, in terms of the team that you put this together, would you still be comfortable if you were in a position whereby you hadn't pressed the wild card, you decided to retain this squad for whatever reason, Andrew? Putting aside the Bailey injury, do you still think that the core of this team is a solid enough base for an FPL manager to have worked with?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why I say it was such a a close call with regards to
Sure.
going with the wild card or not. I had 2 free transfers. I saved my transfer in game week 3, so I could have done an Isak down to João Pedro, for example, and
Oh yeah.
upgraded Bailey and used those 2 free transfers. But um, yeah, there were obviously a few players at the risk of losing value, and there was an obvious lack of certain Liverpool players in there too, and not having a Liverpool defensive player there that I wanted to ultimately jump on, and couldn't really get there comfortably with just those 2 free transfers. And I didn't ultimately want to end up wasting those transfers in a way for players that I expected I would have gotten on a wild card in the next couple of game weeks. I always had the plan of wild carding early this particular season. It was always going to be between 4 and 6. And I'll be completely honest with you, going into that last game week on last week Sunday, game week 3, I even then thought, well, don't really need to wildcard. And
No.
ultimately, I didn't need to wildcard this. It's a decent enough side. And I think there's a lot of players there that can obviously hurt me jumping off of them onto different players that I've got in on my wildcard. But, that's ultimately the risk you take. And that can happen in any game week,
Sure
regardless
can.
of whether you're playing your wildcard or not, and regardless of how early in the season it might be.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, when I looked at this beforehand, I just sort of thought it is a strong squad, but you've articulated it well. I'm going to move us on, Andrew, because I'm sure the people watching are as fascinated as they will have been about the introductory summation that we've given them. They want to see this wildcard squad, and they want to hear your thoughts as to some of the decisions that you've made and which 50-50s I'm sure are still in the offing. So let's move us on, guys, and take a little look at this game week 4 wildcard squad that Andrew's put together. But I'm not going to do it straight away. Look at those grayed out pictures there. We've decided to tease you a little bit, guys, and you will have seen there are timestamps on the video. Now is probably an opportune time to say, of course, that you can head over to fantasyfootballfix.com if you haven't already done so, and follow the thoughts of our elite managers. And of course, Andrew is in that cohort of players, and you can follow his wildcard thoughts before game week 4 gets started. So, Andrew, let's go through this piece by piece then. Let's start with the goalkeeper here, and I'm going to reveal him now. So Raya was previously the goalkeeper prior to the wildcard. Was there anybody else in the offing here in terms of someone who might rival that spot, or are you pretty happy with him as being the best route into the Arsenal defence?
To be honest, that was probably one of the easiest decisions I'd made on the wild card. I started the season with Raya and with Fabianski in goal, and haven't changed them on my wild card. More than happy with both of them. Obviously, the Fabianski core was the reason I sort of went with him, besides any of the other 4 mil options, was just simply because he seemed like one of those keepers who could at some stage make his way into the first team. Now, I don't know whether he's going to continue doing so. Obviously, with the injury to Areola on the weekend, it sounds like he's fine. So, but I'm not relying on him in any way whatsoever. Raya will be playing every game week for me. I'm just not excited at all by the 4.5 mil options, or the 5 mil options, to be perfectly honest. So he was always someone that was just a simple, easy one for me to stick in.
And probably not all that likely to treble up on West Ham options, so you're not going to be blocking your route to any West Ham players by having Fabianski in goal, he says, as a West Ham fan, smiling. So, yeah, I get it. All right, let's move on and take a look at the back 3 that you've selected, mate. So we've got some budget options here right across the board, and we'll come on and talk about the bench in a moment here. But Rico Lewis, obviously the player that's been attracting a lot of attention in the Man City backline. We'll get your thoughts on him and whether or not you believe him to be a secure selection. Konsa, that's not the person you mentioned earlier, of course, from Villa. You were talking about the Liverpool defender in game 1. And Konate, who's found his way into the team here as well. So talk me through these options, Andrew, and what looks like a pretty budget back line. Is that strategically different from how you were expecting to work things out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will caveat that just by saying that Konate option there is open to move. There's probably about 3 spots in my wildcard that could change. Funny enough, it's a forward, a midfielder, and a defender, and Konate is one of them. There is the option of downgrading one of my midfielders to upgrade Konate to either a Robertson or a Trent Alexander-Arnold.
Yeah.
But regardless of what I do in that position, it's going to be a Liverpool defender. I think defensively they've looked fantastic this season, and obviously those next two in particular are amazing for
Heaven
them,
sent, aren't
even
they?
going into
Yeah.
game week 7 with Wolves too. So I think I need that defensive coverage. So Konate's in there just simply as coverage. I don't really, it's not the most exciting thing to do, obviously, when you've got attacking fullbacks in that Liverpool team that you should really be getting in if you've got the funds to do so. But he was someone that I just thought, if I stick him in there, at least I'm covering those clean sheets with those guys. If they don't get attacking returns, then, I've come out trumps.
Yeah, I get it on the Konate. Speaking as an ex-owner of him in previous seasons, the thing that's irritated me with him is his discipline, and the yellow card sort of seemed to follow him around, and that can be ever so frustrating. But I get it is a cheap route into what looks like a great route for clean sheets. And guys, we will take a look at some statistics in a few moments' time as well, and you'll see straight away there the Liverpool defence is definitely sticking out positively. Let's talk around Man City defence then. We a believer in Lewis, or is this a hope pick, Andrew, or is it a little bit of both?
It's a hope pick. It's an upside chase, and it's one of those players in there that I like. When I choose teams each week, I like having those one or two players that are just that, someone that you can hope comes right for you. A little bit of a risky pick, and with Lewis, he's 100% a risky pick. I absolutely realize that. But one that can really come right for me. If it doesn't really work out, then I don't need him in game weeks 5 and 6, and can then look to get rid of him with 3 free transfers in game week 6. So absolutely a risky pick. I realize that. And another reason why those other players that I have in there that I'm considering moving on, or perhaps not actually starting within this wild card, it's just simply because I want to, mitigate that risk, and Lewis is definitely a risk.
Yeah, I understand it. It feels like a risk worth taking, particularly on wild card, I guess, at that price under 5 million to get into or potentially get into the Man City defence. And I like the Robinson selection there on the bench as well. Andrew, should it go south? I mean, they've got decent fixtures still, haven't they? And he's impressed, hasn't he, in the opening few game weeks, Anthony Robertson at fullback as a kind of fourth option substitute.
Absolutely. He was my transfer in game week 2 for Quansah, who obviously didn't end up continuing in the Liverpool backline. No. So quite happy that I've got him. He's obviously come right in game week 2 and 3, I think it is, with the assists. So quite happy to have him. And as a 4.5 mil option, there's not that many other exciting ones in there. Like, I don't hold out too much hope for the Fulham backline, to be honest with you. I'm kind of going cold on Fulham somewhat, but regardless of that, he obviously has that attacking threat, and for 4.5 million, or I mean, he's probably a little bit more now. I'm sure he's one of those that have gone up since I've
low
got
risk,
him in, but quite happy for him to stay there.
Yeah, low risk player. Konsa, you've picked up from Aston Villa here. Andrew, know that their fixtures are improving after a tough start. In terms of that Villa collective, do you think there's any kind of risk here with the Champions League starting up and there being a bit of an unknown quantity? We know how much Emery values European competition, and why wouldn't he in the Champions League level? Do you think this is likely to see an impact on their FPL minutes as a collective, or are we pretty confident that their strong season last season is going to be replicated?
Like, I don't think any of us expect Villa to do as well this season as they did last season. It's obviously going to be a lot tougher for them with that European football. But Konsa was just probably my pick of the 4.5 million options at the beginning of the season. I started with him in game week 1, and given the fixtures that Aston Villa have from game week 3 onwards for at least the next 4 or 5 game weeks, I think he's going to be an ever present. And again, I'm not expecting the world from Aston Villa defensively, but if you compare them to any of the other 4.5 million options that we have, I think they're probably one of the best bets.
Okay, interesting. Let's move on. Talked enough around the defence. People want to see, well, this money being saved. How's it being spent? So let's take a look at this midfield. Now you can see there's a fair amount of chunk of change being invested here, and we can also talk around Mbeumo as well, sitting there on the bench. Andrew, so you've gone for this double Liverpool attacking complement here in midfield of Luis Diaz and Mo Salah. Let's start there. Do you think this is the best contingent of Liverpool options, the Konate, Luis Diaz and Salah, in terms of then what that allows you to do elsewhere in the squad?
Perhaps what allows you to do elsewhere, I suppose. Yeah. Yes. I mean, you could obviously your best option in defense is going to be Trent Alexander-Arnold, and it's actually mentioning earlier the options that I might think about downgrading somewhat to allow for the upgrade of Konate to Trent is Luis Diaz. And he could go down to a midfielder for me. I like the look of Minte at 5.5. Obviously, he only played, I think, about 47 minutes in that first game week, had to come up with that concussion precaution, but he's looked very, very good otherwise. So I quite like to look at him at 5.5, and that obviously frees up that 2 million to go Konate to Trent Alexander-Arnold. It just means that I then need to probably move him on in game week 6 because I'm not so excited about those Brighton fixtures from game week 6. So that's one of the options for me. I mean, obviously, if you can afford Trent and Salah in the side, that's going to be optimal. This Diaz obviously also another a bit of a worry playing for Colombia midweek this week. We've got to have a look at what his minutes were like, and I'm going to wait until Friday, probably Saturday morning, just to see if we hear on whether he is going to start or not. Yeah. But if there is any whispers, or if I start getting cold feet on him, and whether he is going to start or not, then that's one of the moves I'm looking at lining up and switching things out. It means having one less Liverpool player, and I go into game week 4 with my wild card with just 2 Liverpool players as opposed to 3. But another option for me is going Luis Diaz to Minte, Konate to Roberts, or actually, yeah, I could actually, I could actually look at the option of keeping him there and then going Lewis to Konate or Lewis to
Robertson or
Trent Alexander-Arnold, keeping Konate there and downgrading a third player who I'll go through and we talk about our forward options there. So the Liverpool players are up for grabs at the moment for me. Haven't quite settled on exactly who I'm going to have there. I would like to have 3 going into the next 2 game weeks, just simply because of how good they are. It could be that I double up on the defense and maybe mitigate the risk I have with Lewis and getting rid of him for another Liverpool backline player.
So many permutations, aren't there, Andrew? And I think I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Actually, in years gone by, the prospect of having Robertson and Alexander-Arnold as a double up was fairly normal, right? To talk around that. I've not seen it for some considerable time. Has that entered your thoughts at all when you've been considering your wildcard computations of actually possibly even investing 6 million and sort of 7 million in Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold, praying for the clean sheets and looking at them as their attacking output as well? Because it's certainly something that I'm looking at on wildcard, a completely different construct to what you're looking at. Is it something on your mind too?
Yeah, absolutely. I've never been one that's liked spending too much in defense. I think Trent Alexander-Arnold needs to be the exception to that. I don't think I'd be going both Trent and Robertson myself, just purely because of the money involved there. But, that's just a personal option. I'd rather take that extra mil and go Trent and Konate and spend that extra mil in attack. That's just the way I've always sort of played. I've preferred to move that money further up the pitch.
Yeah, makes sense to me. All right, cool. And just before we take a look at the forwards, guys, I do want to ask you around Mbeumo there. Obviously, super tough fixture coming back in game week 4 away at Man City, but he's as close to being fixture proof anyway at that sort of upper mid price in midfield, I guess, anyway, with his talismanic status all but confirmed with Ivan Toney no longer being part of Brentford's operations, right? So, I mean, in terms of Mbeumo, if you had to, no real qualms in playing him in game week 4 anyway. If people already own him, it's just that the fact that you're on wildcard and you've got a team that can allow you to that luxury, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if you can afford to bench a player like Mbeumo because he's playing away at Man City, then obviously a great luxury to have.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are forced into playing him, if you perhaps didn't have someone on the bench that could come on to replace him for that particular game week, I don't think there's anything wrong with playing Mbeumo to City. City haven't exactly looked fantastic defensively, and if Ipswich can get at them, then Brentford can. Definitely. Certainly.
Yeah.
What I've tried to do with this particular team is try and set myself up. Obviously, with the wild card, you're trying to set yourself up for as long term as possible. That changes slightly with the rule changes, and something I can chat over in a little bit once we've got through all of my options in the front line there too. But what I've tried to do is set this team up in a way that I have either got those players that I expect the game week 6 wildcarders to have, or it's easy enough for me to get them in. And Mbeumo is just a classic example of that. I think come game week 6, he's going to be very highly owned just simply because of that fantastic run of fixtures that Brentford have from game week 6. And he's one of those players that you're more than happy coming off the bench if anything does happen to any one of your starters.
Absolutely. Good thoughts, mate. All right. Well, we've teased it long enough. Let's take a look at the front line. Okay, so you kind of mentioned the Brighton fixtures you like initially. So João Pedro finds his way in. We've got captain Erling Haaland. Probably don't need to talk around him too much there, Andrew. And Kai Havertz makes his way into the team as well. I think he is 8.1 million at the time of recording. So talk to me around this trio, Andrew, and how you've arrived at this selection of forwards.
Yeah, I think Haaland and João Pedro kind of speak for themselves. João Pedro is a little bit of a worry, obviously getting that call up to Brazil. I think we're recording this on Tuesday night, so unsure of his minutes at the moment, but I don't think he gets that many minutes internationally, and I'd be optimistic that he starts on the weekend against Ipswich. So I'm going to hang on to him. I think he's as good an option as you can get in that particular price bracket. And he's a fantastic option for the next few game weeks.
Yeah.
He is short-term for me. I think Brighton as a whole are short-term for me. I think those fixtures from game week 6 just get particularly bad for them. So I do have a plan to either bench João Pedro in game week 6 and play those existing 4 midfielders that I have, and Mbeumo obviously comes in for João Pedro, or I can get rid of him game week 6, just depending on what information we get between now and then. Havertz is the other player that I mentioned earlier that is up for grabs. There's obviously the news of the Odegaard injury during the week. I'll be honest with you, I haven't really had enough time to give it enough thought as to how that might affect him. I haven't read up on whether Jesus looks like he's going to be fit enough to play. Obviously, if he is, then that's a big minus in Havertz's box there, because he's likely to be dropping back a lot further. But I'm not just going to simply assume that that's going to be the case just because of that injury. I want to give it a few days and see what happens in the presses there. But another option that I am looking up top there is Nicholas Jackson, actually. And that would save me 0.5 there. Having a look at the numbers for Nicholas Jackson and Havertz. Now, obviously, this season we've only had 3, but it's actually quite similar in terms of the numbers if you have a look at this season compared to last season between the two of them. I just popped onto the play heat maps on the Fantasy Football Fix website and had a look at the differences between the two players there. And it's funny enough, it's Nicholas Jackson who comes out trumps in terms of sort of expected goals, his sort of shots on targets. These are average statistics per 90 minutes.
Yeah.
It's obviously Kai Havertz. It's a little bit more creative, so it means that his expected assists are slightly better, but it's slightly better. And I think Nicholas Jackson has got a bit of a bad rap. I mean, he scored 14 last season compared to Havertz 13. Kai Havertz expected goals last season were just under 12, so he was pretty much bang on. He was a goal out in terms of expected and what he actually performed with. Nicholas Jackson's expected goals last season was over 18. He scored 14. So if they're kind of, going to what we should expect, Nicholas Jackson, you could argue, is a slightly better option there. So it's really just a case of how you see that Chelsea team fitting together. And again, I wouldn't call it a risk, but it's obviously he's a lot lesser owned than someone like Kai Havertz. But I quite like that because he's lesser owned. It just gives me that,
bit of an edge,
that foot into a player who can get me a better rank if he does well.
Definitely. Love it. Not a name that I was expecting to hear you talk around. And I guess the Kai Havertz situation as well, with Ødegaard's injury on the international break as well. We have a Raheem Sterling shaped challenger as well to the offensive lineup in Arsenal to consider, and it'll be interesting to see how he finds his way presumably into that starting lineup as well. So a few unknowns there with Arsenal as well. Got to ask you, Andrew, it's a nice segue. In a moment we're going to take a look at some stats as well, but before we do that, do you think this team is what you're gonna rock into game week 4 with? I mean, we, like you say, we're recording Tuesday evening. We don't yet know prognosis, assuming no injuries, assuming positive news on João Pedro's travel schedule and what have you. Or is there anything that you're sort of thinking, do you know what, I can't confidently say this is how I'm gonna shake out? And if so, who's most at risk?
Yeah, it's the Havertz, Luis Diaz, and Konate options that are at risk for me at the moment. So I'm probably 75% happy that this is the team I will go in with. If I am spooked a little bit with Luis Diaz's minutes just because of international and obviously with the Champions League starting up in the next sort of week or two, then I may choose to downgrade and go with a Brighton midfielder and go with a Trent and chase that upside, as opposed to going a little bit more sort of Dallard and just going with Konate in there. So those are the three that are sort of up for grabs for me at the moment. Okay. And I think I need to take slight risks here because I've gone for the wild card a little bit earlier than a lot of people would do. And the reason I did that, it was just simply because I think we need to think about the wild card slightly different this season with the rule changes, and that that wild card for us has always been a bit of a safety net. It's always been there, and we don't want to use it early in the season, obviously because we don't have a whole lot of data to go on. And if we get it wrong, there isn't that safety net after we've used it. There isn't that bank of transfers we could have previously to be able to fix what might not have quite worked out the way it had previously or how you wanted. So going into a wild card this season seems like it's not a sort of a hard stop and then you're kind of starting again with that particular wild card. It's almost as if it can be just a part of your transfers. And I've got 2 free transfers which I'm taking into this. Obviously, naturally, when you're wildcarding, you're setting up for those next 2 or 3 at least. You shouldn't need to use a transfer for the next game week or 2 after a wild card,
God willing.
So the idea is to go into game week 6 or 7 with at least 3 or 4 transfers, and that's when I think the majority of managers are going to be using that wild card. It just seems to be the most sort of natural time to do so. What I'm trying to do here is get a little bit of a head start, essentially. I'm taking a little bit of a risk because I'm choosing players based on slightly less data than those other managers will have. What I'm ultimately saying is that I don't see the landscape changing too much in the next 2 or 3 game weeks between my wildcard and theirs. And even if it does somewhat, I will have transfers in the bank now to be able to react to that. Whereas obviously wouldn't have had that previously. So, and the other side of that, obviously, as the price rises, I've managed to grab. I think if I had to wildcard now, this team would cost me 0.5 or so more, and I wouldn't be able to afford it, to be perfectly honest. So, all things going well, I could have a team in game week 6 that others are looking to get into, but can't quite afford. So, that's obviously if all things go well over the next 2 or 3 game weeks. So it's a calculated risk and one that I'd like to take, as I'd like to attack it a little bit more this season.
100%, definitely. Lovely way of summing it up, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out going into game weeks, 6 and 7 and beyond. And I'll be interested. It'll be about the time that we'll get you back on the channel around then, Andrew. I would have thought. So it'll be interesting to take note of your points now and reflect back on them when we catch up in a couple of game weeks' time. Andrew, we're going to end the video this time with taking a look at some statistics. I know you mentioned data points have not been that plentiful yet, with only 3 game weeks worth of data in the books, but I think it's still interesting to take a look at a new feature on the Elite 11 team reveal. So let's take a look at the game weeks 1 through 3 stats so far. Okay, guys, so what we've got here so far is game weeks 1 through 3 data, and we're presenting totals here rather than averages. These may be stats that we change around, and if you do have any that you particularly like, then do please pop them into the comments and we shall see what we can do. But at the moment, we've pulled out some of the key ones that we think would be of interest to managers when they're making their transfers or if they are on wildcards. We're looking at expected goals, attempted assists, shots in the box, expected FPL points, and expected goals conceded, that team metric in the bottom right-hand corner there. All of these stats are available on fantasyfootballfix.com. You've got the sandbox, you can create your own tables, and there's just a multitude of tools that you can go and have a play with, of course, guys. But Andrew, I'm going to ask you, when you're looking at this data, and I'm sure you have taken a look at the stats yourself, you mentioned Nicholas Jackson there. He's a name that I wasn't expecting to have mentioned. It's backed up with the XG that you've talked around there as well. But one player who we didn't see on your wildcard draft is Semenyo, who's impressed in game weeks 1 through 3. Look at the shot total there. What's he got to do to find his way in, Andrew? What's this guy got to do to impress you?
It just simply comes down to the fixtures for me. Like I said, I am kind of looking at that 5.5 million option in the midfield if I do want to upgrade the defense there. But so I did have a look at Semenyo, and the numbers, he is by far the best option if you are looking in that bracket. Smith Rowe, I've kind of, like I said, I've kind of gone off Fulham a little bit, so he's not exciting me too much. I think I'd rather go with the Minte option, even if it is just short term for game weeks 4 and 5. Obviously had a look at Semenyo, but it's just the fixtures, unfortunately, just put me off.
Yeah, I see. And he's a little bit more expensive than Rodgers as well, isn't he? You meant Rodgers was in your team, I guess, as your 5th choice midfielder as the budget, and he's more expensive, isn't he? I'm interested in this calling on Fulham just before we wrap things up, Andrew. I'm looking at them here. Their expected goals conceded, they're 5th best so far. You've got the likes of Muniz, who's not returned loads of points, but lots of shots in the box. You've got Andreas Pereira and attempted assists. What is it about them that's putting you off, man? Is it a fixtures thing? Is it a begrudging feeling as a Muniz owner? What's your read? I'm intrigued.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's one of those other things that is quite annoying. I'm actually going to the Fulham game on Saturday, so getting rid of Muniz on the wild card was quite difficult, to be honest. I'll probably go there and he'll smash in a brace. No, it's not so much that I don't want them in my team. I think those fixtures start getting a little bit more difficult now, and we've got to remember that the last 2 game weeks have been against promoted teams in Leicester and Ipswich. So the numbers will look quite decent for them because of those 2 fixtures, I think. But now they go into West Ham at home, not too bad. I do expect West Ham to score. Then they've got Newcastle, Forest away, not as easy as we think. and then they've got Man City and Aston Villa. So I'm just saying I'm not quite expecting as much of them in the next 3 to 4 game weeks as I perhaps was in those first 3 game weeks that we had.
Yeah, I see. Perfectly reasonable. I'm only teasing, and I hope you have a great time at the cottage. I'm sure you will do. Andrew, mate, it's been a pleasure. You've given me tons of food for thought on my own wildcard. I'm sure folks watching as well who are also on wildcard will have lots of thoughts. And if you do have thoughts, guys, do pop them into the comments as well. And do please, of course, smash a like on the video as well if you haven't already done so. Andrew, is there anything else on your mind before we wrap things up? Anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, I don't think so. I was just having a look through that data there, and I think it was Harry who was saying on Twitter today the Muniz, the shots in the box 11. I think he mentioned that 7 of those were headers, and I think 1 of them was a big chance. So I think it probably needs to be taken with a slight pinch of salt. That. But besides that, they're interesting numbers, and I think there's a lot to be taken from that, even though there is only 3 game weeks worth. I think a lot of the time we tend to overthink things a little bit, and it's usually the obvious option that's the right one. So it's nice to be thinking of certain players and having those particular players pop up here. There are obviously the fixtures that we just need to take into account, which is why the likes of those Bournemouth guys are probably not going to make it in, unfortunately for me.
No, I see, mate. And if I'd seen a wildcard draft with the likes of Andreas Pereira and Dwight McNeil and Tavernier in the side, I would have been wondering whether or not you'd perhaps read too much into the data at this early stage of the season, but you're too much of an esteemed veteran for that to happen, mate. It's been a pleasure. Going to be intriguing to see how the wild card shapes out. Thanks for your patience last week as well, mate. Between you and me, that was a tough one, but I'm glad we've got this video sorted for the guys ahead of game week 4. And guys, if you've enjoyed it, do please, as I say, smash a like on the video. Do please head over to fantasyfootballfix.com and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and subscribe to the channel as well. It'd be great to get your support. And guys, I'll be back next week after game week 4 is in the books. Have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.